My father turned me into a servant after my mother's death. They left me alone on Christmas at 11 to go on vacation. But when I graduated with honors and got a great job, they came back begging for $5,000. His response left them broken. I'm 24 years old. I work in digital marketing for a pretty decent company. And honestly, I never thought I'd make it this far. Not because I'm not smart or capable, but because there were years when I genuinely believed my life was never going to be more than cleaning up what others messed up and doing what others didn't want to do. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was 9 years old and my mom died of cancer. I'm not going to get into all the details because honestly a lot of them are fuzzy in my memory, but what I do remember is the emptiness she left. That silence in the house that never really got filled. My dad, Henry, was destroyed, or at least that's how it seemed. I was destroyed too, but I was a kid, you know? I didn't have the tools to process that. I just knew my mom wasn't there anymore and everything felt cold and empty. My dad was like 38 when mom died, and during that first year after her death it was weird. He tried to be both mom and dad, but the mom part didn't really work out for him, if you know what I mean. We ate a lot of frozen pizzas and the house was always kind of messy, but at least we were together and he was making an effort. I remember sometimes he'd read to me before bed, even though you could tell he was exhausted, and on weekends we'd go to the park or rent movies. It wasn't perfect, but he was my dad, and I felt like he loved me, and that we were navigating that shit together. But then, like a year after mom died, he met Nancy. She was 28 years old, so like 12 years younger than him, and she worked in some office where he'd gone to do some paperwork. At first everything seemed normal, like they'd go out to dinner, and she'd come to the house sometimes, always smiling and being super nice to me. She'd buy me little things, ask me how school was going, that kind of stuff. I was a 10-year-old kid who missed his mom. So I guess I wanted to believe Nancy was a good person. Things changed when Nancy and her daughter Lauren moved in with us. Lauren was 17 at the time, practically an adult to me who was barely 10, and from day one you could tell she wasn't happy to be there. She spent all her time locked in her room, talking on the phone, going out with her friends. Typical teenager stuff, I guess. But Nancy, well, Nancy started showing her true colors almost immediately after moving in. First, it was small things, like asking me to clean my room or wash my dishes after eating, which is fine, we should all do that. But then she started assigning me more and more tasks. Clean the bathroom, vacuum the living room, take out the trash, wash everyone's dishes, not just mine. And every time I asked my dad if that was normal, or if Lauren also had to do things, he'd tell me Nancy knew what she was doing and that I should be more cooperative because she was making an effort to be part of our family. Looking back, I should have seen it coming, but I was a kid. What was I supposed to know? The situation kept getting gradually worse. By the time I was 11, I was basically the house servant. I had a list of chores to do every day after school. Wash the dishes, clean the kitchen, vacuum, clean the bathrooms, take out the trash, fold the clean laundry. And I'm not exaggerating when I say Lauren did nothing. That girl would come home from school, throw herself on the couch to watch TV, or lock herself in her room, and nobody said anything to her. When I'd ask Nancy why Lauren didn't have to help, she'd tell me Lauren was busy with school and her activities, as if I didn't have school too. And my dad would just nod and tell me to stop complaining, that we all had to contribute to the family. But the moment that really marked me, the one that still makes my blood boil when I think about it, was Christmas, when I was 11. Almost 12. Lauren had gotten a dog, a golden retriever named Buddy, and obviously she didn't take care of it. Guess who ended up feeding it, walking it, cleaning up its accidents, and basically being responsible for that dog? Yeah, me, and one 1-year-old kid. Well, turns out that Christmas, Nancy decided the family would go on vacation to a beach resort. I was excited, you know? It had been years since we'd done anything like that, and I thought we were finally going to be a normal family. But like 2 weeks before the trip, Nancy told me I wasn't going. That someone had to stay to take care of Buddy because we couldn't take him to the resort, and the place where they boarded dogs was full. I was in shock, literally, couldn't believe it. I told her it wasn't fair. That Buddy was Lauren's dog, why couldn't she stay? Nancy looked at me and told me, with that fake smile she had, that I was more responsible and they trusted me to take care of the house. I asked my dad to step in, to tell her this wasn't right, but he just told me not to be dramatic, that it was only a few days and I could mature a little. So, yeah. I spent Christmas vacation alone at home at 11 years old, taking care of a dog that wasn't even mine, while my dad, Nancy, and Lauren had a great time at the beach. There was food in the fridge, and Nancy had left emergency numbers. But still, I was a kid alone at home during Christmas. I remember I cried a lot that week, and not just because I felt lonely, but because I was starting to understand that something was very wrong with all of this. Aunt Judith, my mom's sister, came to visit me after Christmas when she found out I'd spent the holidays alone. She was furious, and it was the first time anyone validated what I was feeling. She and her son Andrew, who was like 16 at the time, started visiting me more often after that. Andrew was great. He'd take me to play basketball or to the movies, and he treated me like I mattered, like my feelings mattered. Aunt Judith tried to talk to my dad about the situation, but he told her she didn't understand, that Nancy was doing her best and I just needed to adapt. The following years were more of the same, but worse. Every year that passed, I had more responsibilities. At 13, I was doing the grocery shopping. Nancy would give me the list and money. I'd cook dinner several times a week and basically kept the house running. Lauren, meanwhile, had graduated high school and entered a local university, but she kept living at home and kept doing nothing. In fact, now that she was in college, it was worse because she'd come home late at night and leave everything lying around for me to clean up the next day. My grades at school were good, really good actually, but not because I had a lot of time to study, but because I took refuge in books and school as a way to escape from home. The school library became my favorite place because there nobody asked me to clean something or do something for them. When I was 14, I finally exploded. It was a normal day. I'd gotten home from school, and Nancy was scolding me because supposedly I hadn't cleaned the bathroom well that morning before leaving. I was tired, literally and emotionally exhausted, and I told her I didn't want to do all that anymore, that it wasn't fair Lauren never did anything. Nancy yelled at me that I was ungrateful, that she had opened the doors of her home to me, as if it hadn't been my home first, and that if I didn't like it, I could leave. My dad came home in the middle of that argument, and I thought, finally, he's going to defend me. I explained everything. Told him I was fed up, that I couldn't take this situation anymore. You know what he told me? He looked at me and said, "Life's not fair, you just have to deal with it." That was it. There was no, "Let's talk about this." There was no, "You're right, this isn't fair." Just deal with it. Something broke inside me that day. I don't know how to explain it. I no longer saw my dad as my dad, but as a stranger who shared the house with me. Aunt Judith and Andrew continued, being my lifeline during those years. I'd spend every weekend I could with them, and they never made me feel like a burden. Andrew, who by then was like 20 and in college, told me something when I was 16 that changed my perspective. We were in his car after he'd picked me up from the house, and I was telling him about something Nancy had made me do that week, and he stopped me and said, "This isn't normal. You know that, right? What your dad allows them to do to you isn't normal. They're treating you like a household employee, not like a son." I'd gotten so used to that dynamic that at some level I'd started to believe maybe it was normal, that maybe all kids had to do all that. But Andrew made me see that no, what they were doing to me was wrong, and that I needed to get out of there as soon as I could. So I focused on getting out. My grades were excellent because, ironically, all the work I had to do at home had made me super organized and disciplined. I applied for every scholarship I could find, and when I was 18, fresh out of high school, I received a full scholarship to a university that was like 3 hours away. It didn't just cover tuition, but also housing and a small amount for expenses. It was my ticket out, and I took it without thinking twice. The day I left, my dad wasn't even home. He was working. Nancy helped me load my stuff into Aunt Judith's car because, yeah, Aunt Judith was the one who took me, and told me not to forget everything she'd taught me about responsibility. I wanted to laugh in her face, but I just nodded and left. College was, literally, a revelation. Suddenly, I was in a place where I only had to worry about myself, about my classes, about my future. I had a roommate who was normal and did his share of cleaning without anyone asking. I had friends who invited me to things and didn't treat me like I was invisible. For the first time in years, I felt like a real person with value. I'd call my dad from time to time because, I don't know, I guess a part of me still wanted a relationship with him. But the conversations were always superficial. He'd ask me how school was going. I'd say fine, and that was it. Nancy would sometimes get on the phone and ask me if I was behaving, as if I were a small child. Everything was relatively quiet until I was in my second year of college. I got a message from Lauren on social media. We hadn't talked in years, practically, so it surprised me. The message was long, and basically she was asking me to write some essays for her classes. She said she was very busy with work and other responsibilities and needed help, and that since I'd always been good at writing, she thought she could count on me. The audacity of that woman? Seriously? After years of doing nothing while I did everything, now she wanted me to cheat for her at school. I replied no, that it was dishonest and she needed to do her own work. She responded calling me selfish, and that family helps family. I told her it was funny. She now considered me family when she'd never treated me as such. As expected, Nancy found out about my response and called me. She was furious, yelling at me on the phone about how dare I reject Lauren, that Lauren was going through a difficult time and I was her brother, technically stepbrother, but whatever, and should support her. I told her I wasn't going to cheat for Lauren and hung up. Then my dad called, and he was more disappointed than angry, which somehow was worse. He told me he was disappointed in me, that he'd expected me to be more mature and more compassionate. That hurt. I'm not going to lie, but it also made me angry. Where had all that concern about compassion been when I was a kid doing all the housework? I told him that maybe if he'd been a better father, I'd be more compassionate, and I hung up. We didn't talk for months after that. I thought that would be the end. But no. Of course not. When I was in my third year of college, my dad texted me saying he needed to see me, that it was important. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my university, and when I arrived, Nancy was with him. I should have known. I should have turned around and left, but honestly, I still had that silly hope that maybe my dad was finally going to acknowledge everything that had happened. They sat across from me, and after a few awkward minutes of small talk, they got straight to the point. Turns out Lauren had been having financial problems. She'd failed several classes, was about to lose her financial aid, and needed money to be able to continue in school. And guess who they were asking for help? Yeah, me, the son they'd basically used as a servant for years. Nancy started with the speech about how family is family and we all support each other in difficult times. My dad was sitting there, nodding, saying it would just be a loan and Lauren would pay me back. I asked how much they needed, more out of curiosity than anything. They told me like $5,000. $5,000 I didn't have because I was in college, with a scholarship that barely gave me enough for basics, and worked part-time at the university library, making minimum wage to have some extra money. And even if I had that money, why the hell would I give it to Lauren? I sat there for a moment, looking at them, and something inside me just clicked. I no longer felt anger or sadness, just tiredness. I was tired of these people and their infinite capacity to ask me for things without ever giving me anything in return. I told them no, that I didn't have that money and that even if I did, I wouldn't give it to Lauren. Nancy started raising her voice, calling me selfish and cruel, saying that someday I was going to need help and nobody was going to be there for me. And that's where I finally said everything I'd been holding in for years. I told her that she'd turned me into her household employee since I moved into her house, that she'd left me alone at Christmas when I was a child, that she'd allowed her perfect daughter to do absolutely nothing while I did everything. I told my dad he'd failed as a father. I told them I'd never really been part of their family, that I'd only been useful when they needed someone to clean or cook or take care of their things, and that now that they needed money, suddenly I was important to them. I got up and walked out of that coffee shop without looking back. Nancy was yelling something about respect, but I didn't pay attention. That was like 3 years ago. My dad tried to contact me several times after that, text messages mainly, saying we needed to talk, that I was being immature. I didn't respond for months. Finally, like 6 months later, He sent me a long message explaining that Lauren had dropped out of college because she couldn't pay, that she had credit card debt, and that he and Nancy were stressed trying to help her. He was asking me again to reconsider helping them, financially, because I was the successful one in the family now. The irony of that made me laugh. I responded with a short message telling him I was sorry Lauren was going through that, but it wasn't my problem, and to please stop contacting me. I told him he'd had years to be a father to me and had chosen not to be, and that now it was too late. I blocked his number after that. I graduated last year with honors, got this job that pays well and allows me to live comfortably, and honestly, my life is good now. I'm still very close to Aunt Judith and Andrew, who's now like 28 and one of the most important people in my life. They were at my graduation, screaming and celebrating when I received my diploma, and that meant more to me than anything my dad could have done. Aunt Judith told me recently that she's proud of me, not just for what I've achieved professionally, but for having had the courage to cut ties with people who hurt me, even if they were biological family. Sometimes, I wonder if I was too hard on my dad, if maybe I should have given him another chance. But then I remember that one-year-old kid spending Christmas alone and it passes. I don't owe those people anything. Last week, Andrew and I went to dinner, and he told me he ran into Nancy at the supermarket, and she asked about me. Andrew said she told him I was a bad son, that I'd abandoned my family when they needed me most. Andrew told me, he responded, that I hadn't abandoned my family, that my family was fine, and having dinner with him that night, and that she and my dad had never really been my family. That made me smile. It's weird, you know? When you realize that family isn't always the people you share blood with, but the people who actually see you, who value you, who are there when things get tough. Aunt Judith and Andrew are my family, and that's enough for me.